Whitney Houston was standing in front of a mirror in her trailer on the set of The Bodyguard, hands shaking so violently she couldn't apply her own makeup. Outside, a film crew of over 200 people waited for her to emerge for her first major scene. Kevin Costner, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, was ready. Director Mick Jackson had called action 3 times already. But Whitney, the woman who had commanded stages in front of 100,000 screaming fans, couldn't walk 20 feet to face a camera. What happened in that trailer, and in the weeks that followed, was a crisis so severe that it nearly destroyed both the film and Whitney herself. But it was Kevin Costner's quiet act of protection, one that nobody saw, and he never spoke about until years later, that saved everything. This isn't just another behind-the-scenes story. This is about the moment when Hollywood's most confident superstar discovered she was terrified of failing, and how one man's promise changed the course of music and film history forever. Asterisk, Whitney Houston didn't want to be in The Bodyguard. That's the truth that nobody talked about during all the press tours and red carpet premieres in late 1992. By 1990, when Kevin Costner first called her about the role, Whitney had already become one of the most successful recording artists in history. Her first 2 albums, Whitney Houston and Whitney, had sold 45 million copies combined worldwide. She had won multiple Grammy Awards, broken records, and established herself as the voice of a generation. But acting in a major Hollywood film? That was someone else's dream, not hers. The Bodyguard script had been floating around Hollywood since 1975. Originally written by Lawrence Kasdan as a vehicle for Steve McQueen and Diana Ross. After McQueen's death in 1980, the project went through numerous iterations. By 1979, Diana Ross had signed on to star opposite Ryan O'Neal, but she ultimately backed out after conflicts over the script's nude scenes and violent content. The project went dormant for over a decade until Kevin Costner, fresh off massive successes with Dances with Wolves and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, decided it was time to resurrect it. Director Mick Jackson was initially skeptical about casting Whitney. He wanted established actresses like Michelle Pfeiffer or Kim Basinger, women who had proven box office appeal and acting credentials. But Costner was adamant. He had seen something in Whitney that went beyond her musical talent. He believed she possessed a natural vulnerability and authenticity that would make the role of Rachel Marron, a superstar singer being stalked by an obsessed fan, absolutely believable. When Costner called Whitney personally in late 1990, she gave him the same answer she had given every other filmmaker who had approached her with scripts. "I'm not ready," she told him. "I'm a singer, Kevin. I don't know anything about acting." But Costner was persistent. He explained to her that this wasn't just any role. Rachel Marron was a character who mirrored Whitney's own life, a successful music star who understood the isolating pressure of fame. He told her something that would later prove to be prophetic. "Whitney, you won't have to act much. You'll just have to be yourself and trust me to guide you through the parts that require acting." Still, Whitney hesitated. She had her I'm Your Baby Tonight World Tour scheduled for 1991, 99 concert dates across Asia, North America, and Europe. The album had been a deliberate effort to showcase a more contemporary, edgy sound, incorporating new jack swing and hip-hop influences. Critics had questioned whether she was black enough in her previous work, and this album was her response. The tour was critical to proving she could deliver this new sound live. Starting a film in the middle of that tour schedule seemed impossible. But then a friend said something to Whitney that shifted her perspective entirely. According to Whitney herself in a 1993 Rolling Stone interview, this friend told her, "Whitney, if you do this, do you realize what it would mean for other black actresses, for other black women, period?" That statement hit Whitney hard. Here was an opportunity to star in a major Hollywood romantic thriller opposite one of the biggest white male stars in the world, in a relationship where their interracial dynamic wouldn't be the central conflict. It would just be a love story. Period. The cultural significance was enormous. After thinking it over for several weeks, Whitney called Costner back. "I'll do it," she said. "But you have to promise me something. You can't let me make a fool of myself out there." Costner's response was immediate. "I promise you, Whitney. I won't let that happen." That promise would be tested in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Production on The Bodyguard was scheduled to begin in November 1991, after Whitney completed her world tour. Costner, serving as both star and producer, personally negotiated the delayed start date with Warner Brothers to accommodate her touring schedule. The film's budget was set at $25 million. Modest by Hollywood standards, but substantial enough to require significant box office success. Asterisk. Whitney's I'm Your Baby Tonight World Tour kicked off on March 14, 1991, at Yokohama Arena in Japan. The production was the most elaborate of her career, featuring 300 synchronized lights designed by Mark Fisher and Jonathan Park, the same team that had created Pink Floyd's legendary staging for The Wall. The original plan had been to start the tour in the United Kingdom. But the outbreak of the Gulf War in January 1991 forced a postponement of the European dates to the fall. Instead, after the 2 Japan shows, Whitney returned to the United States for a special HBO concert at Norfolk Naval Base on March 31, 1991. Titled Welcome Home Heroes with Whitney Houston. Honoring American troops returning from the Persian Gulf War, that concert became HBO's most viewed special in history at the time, with over 50 million viewers. But behind the spectacular success, Whitney was struggling in ways that nobody in her inner circle wanted to acknowledge. The summer of 1991 was, by all accounts, one of the worst touring seasons in music history. A recession was hitting the entertainment industry hard. Major artists were canceling dates due to poor ticket sales. Whitney was no exception. Despite her superstar status, many venues were playing to significantly lower capacity than expected. The financial pressure was compounded by physical strain. In August 1991, Whitney developed a severe throat ailment that forced her to cancel several Canadian tour dates. Her vocal coach at the time privately expressed concern that she was pushing herself too hard, performing nearly 100 shows in 7 months while also preparing mentally for her first major film role. When the tour finally reached the United Kingdom in late August, Whitney found her stride again. She performed 10 consecutive sold-out shows at Wembley Arena in London from September 5 through 16, breaking her own previous record of 9 straight nights from her 1988 Moment of Truth World Tour. The 10-date residency remains the most performances in a single year by a female artist in Wembley Arena's history. But the triumph came at a cost. By the time Whitney finished her final European shows in early October 1991, ending the tour in Paris on October 2, she was physically and emotionally exhausted. She had approximately 3 weeks to rest, recover, and prepare herself mentally before production on The Bodyguard was scheduled to begin. On November 25, 1991, those 3 weeks would prove to be nowhere near enough time. Whitney later admitted in interviews that during that brief break, she experienced crippling anxiety attacks. She would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, having nightmares about forgetting her lines or freezing on camera. "I kept thinking, what have I done?" she recalled. "I'm about to make a complete fool of myself in front of the entire world." Before principal photography could begin, director Mick Jackson insisted on one final screen test in January 1991, before Whitney's tour had even started. Jackson, despite Kevin Costner's passionate advocacy, remained unconvinced that a singer with no formal acting training could carry a major Hollywood film. The studio executives at Warner Brothers shared his skepticism. According to British director Mick Jackson, the challenge was unique. "You're making a queen of her genre into a beginner again," he explained in a 1992 interview. Whitney was aware of the loss of control that would mean. Her life as a pop star means that everything is set to her requirements, which is totally different from what happens when shooting a film. The screen test was scheduled at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank. Whitney arrived with her assistant, her makeup artist, and a level of nervous energy that everyone on set could feel. Kevin Costner was there to read opposite her, and he immediately noticed something was wrong. Whitney, who commanded stages with the confidence of someone born to perform, looked terrified. In her trailer before the test, Whitney's hands were shaking so badly that her makeup artist couldn't get her eyeliner straight. Costner, who had been waiting on set, went to check on her. What he found was a woman on the verge of a panic attack. "I can't do this, Kevin," Whitney told him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to embarrass myself, and I'm going to embarrass you for believing in me." Costner sat down next to her and took her trembling hands in his. "Whitney, look at me," he said firmly but gently. "You look beautiful. You're going to walk out there and we're going to run through the scene. If it doesn't work, we'll try again. And if it still doesn't work, we'll keep trying until it does. But I promise you this, I won't let you fail." Whitney asked for 20 minutes alone. Costner left the trailer and returned to the set, where Jackson and several Warner Brothers executives were waiting impatiently. "She needs a moment," Costner told them. "Give her space." When Whitney finally emerged from the trailer 20 minutes later, something had shifted. She walked onto the set, took her position, and nodded to indicate she was ready. According to Costner's recollection years later, "We hadn't said 4 lines when we had to stop. I needed to know what she had done in those 20 minutes. Whatever internal transformation Whitney had undergone in that trailer, it worked. Her performance in the screen test was raw, vulnerable, and completely authentic. She wasn't trying to act like someone else. She was simply being herself, trusting that her own emotional truth would be enough. Mick Jackson was convinced. Warner Bros. Gave their approval. The Bodyguard was officially greenlit with Whitney Houston as the lead. But the screen test had also revealed something troubling that only Costner seemed to fully recognize. Whitney's confidence as a performer didn't automatically translate to confidence as an actor. The panic he had witnessed in her trailer that day wasn't a one-time occurrence. It was a warning sign of something much deeper. Over the next several months, as Whitney completed her grueling world tour, Costner stayed in regular contact with her. He would call her after shows, asking how she was feeling, reminding her that she could do this, reinforcing the promise he had made. He was already acting as her bodyguard, protecting her from her own self-doubt, long before filming began. November 25, 1991, the first day of principal photography on The Bodyguard. Location, downtown Los Angeles. The scene was the interior of the Mayan Theater at 1038 South Hill Street, a spectacular 1920s movie palace decorated in wild pre-Columbian architectural style. In the film, this would be where Rachel Marin performs to a packed house before a riot breaks out and Frank Farmer, Costner's character, has to carry her to safety. The scene required Whitney to perform her song Queen of the Night in front of hundreds of extras, while cameras captured every moment. For a performer who had sung in front of stadium crowds of 100,000, this should have been effortless. But when assistant director John Wildermuth called for Whitney to come to set from her trailer, there was no response. Production assistants knocked on her trailer door. No answer. Mick Jackson, growing increasingly concerned as the schedule ticked away, asked Costner if he would check on her. What Costner found when he opened that trailer door was something he would never fully discuss publicly until years after Whitney's death in 2012. He found her sitting on the floor, knees pulled up to her chest, hyperventilating and unable to speak. She was having a severe panic attack. Costner immediately shut the trailer door behind him and knelt down beside her. "Breathe, Whitney. Just breathe. Look at my eyes and breathe with me." He began demonstrating slow, deep breathing, and gradually, over several minutes, Whitney's breathing began to stabilize. When she could finally speak, her words came out in broken fragments. "I can't go out there. Kevin, I can't do it. Everyone's waiting. I'm holding up everything. I'm wasting everyone's time and money." Costner's response was firm. "Stop. Nobody is thinking that. You're not wasting anything. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Now listen to me very carefully. I made you a promise, and I'm keeping it. You're not going to fail because I won't allow it. Do you trust me?" Whitney nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Then trust that I know what I'm doing," Costner continued. "We're going to walk out there together. You're going to perform the way you've performed 1,000 times before. The only difference is there are cameras. That's it. Just cameras. They're not your enemy. They're just capturing what you already know how to do perfectly." What Costner did next was unprecedented in Hollywood production protocol. He went back to the set and spoke directly to Mick Jackson and the producers. "We're postponing this scene," he announced. "I know we're on a tight schedule and I know what this costs. But if we force her to do this right now, we're going to break her. And if we break her on day one, we won't have a movie." The decision was stunning. Film productions operate on meticulously planned schedules. Every day of delay costs tens of thousands of dollars. Cast and crew schedules, location permits, equipment rentals, everything is coordinated down to the hour. Postponing a scene on the first day of shooting could throw the entire production into chaos. But Kevin Costner, leveraging his position as both star and producer, made it clear this wasn't negotiable. Whitney's well-being was more important than the schedule. Jackson agreed, though not without significant concern about how this would affect the production timeline and budget. The scene was rescheduled for later in the week. For the rest of that first day, Costner worked with Jackson to shoot scenes that didn't require Whitney, giving her time to regain her emotional equilibrium. That evening, after the crew had wrapped for the day, Costner did something else that nobody on the production knew about until years later. He went back to Whitney's hotel and sat with her for over 3 hours. They didn't rehearse lines. They didn't discuss the film. Instead, Costner talked to her about fear, about vulnerability, and about the difference between confidence and courage. "Confidence is knowing you can do something," he told her. "Courage is doing it even when you're terrified. You don't need confidence right now, Whitney. You just need courage. And I'll be right there beside you every single step of the way." What Kevin Costner did over the next 4 months of filming went far beyond his contractual obligations as a co-star and producer. He essentially appointed himself Whitney's personal emotional bodyguard, creating a protective environment around her that allowed her to navigate her fear without collapsing under it. Every morning before call time, Costner would meet with Whitney privately. They would run through the day's scenes, but more importantly, he would check in on her emotional state. "How did you sleep? Are you feeling overwhelmed? What do you need from me today?" On days when Whitney had particularly challenging scenes that required deep emotional vulnerability or complex dialogue, Costner would restructure the shooting schedule to ensure she felt supported. He made sure that her first takes of the day were always simpler scenes, allowing her to build confidence before tackling anything difficult. During takes, Costner developed a subtle signal system with Whitney. If she felt herself starting to panic, she would touch her left ear. Costner would then immediately ask director Mick Jackson for a brief break, creating space for Whitney to regroup without having to publicly admit she was struggling. The cast and crew noticed Costner's unusual level of attentiveness to Whitney, but most assumed it was simply professional courtesy or perhaps the foundation of the on-screen chemistry they needed to build. Only a handful of people understood the full extent of what was actually happening. Vincent Patterson, the film's choreographer, later recalled, Kevin was essentially running two jobs. He was performing his role as Frank Farmer, and he was actually being Frank Farmer to Whitney in real life. He was protecting her from everything that might hurt her, including herself. One of the most critical moments came during filming of the intimate scenes between Frank and Rachel. The original script called for more extensive romantic scenes, including partial nudity. Whitney, who had been firm about her boundaries during contract negotiations, was uncomfortable with the explicitness of some sequences. Costner went to bat for her with the studio and with Jackson. "These scenes don't need to be this explicit to work," he argued. "The emotional intimacy is what matters, not the physical exposure. If we make Whitney uncomfortable, we lose the authenticity that makes this whole thing work." Several love scenes were ultimately cut from the final edit, though not because they were too racy, as Whitney later clarified in interviews. They were removed because Costner felt they weren't necessary to the emotional arc of the story, and keeping them in would have put unnecessary pressure on Whitney during an already stressful production. Behind the scenes, Costner was also managing Jackson and the producers, helping them understand that patience with Whitney would ultimately result in better performances and a better film. "Every time we push her too hard, we get a tense, self-conscious performance," he explained in production meetings. "When we give her space to find her way into the scene naturally, she's brilliant. She's not a trained actor, but she has something more valuable. She has genuine emotional transparency. Our job is to create an environment where that transparency can shine through." There were still difficult days. During the filming of the climactic scene where Rachel performs at the Academy Awards ceremony, shot at the historic Pantages Theater in Hollywood, Whitney had another significant panic attack. This time, though, she was able to recognize what was happening and use the breathing techniques Costner had taught her. She called for a 10-minute break, composed herself, and returned to deliver one of the most powerful performances in the film. Costner watched from behind the monitor, and when the scene wrapped, he walked over to Whitney and simply said, "I told you that you could do this. You didn't need me. You had it in you all along." February 1992. The production was nearing completion, with only a few remaining scenes left to shoot. One scene, however, had been deliberately saved until near the end. And it was the one that terrified Whitney more than any other. Singing "I Will Always Love You," a cappella at the film's emotional climax. The song itself had a complicated history. Written and originally recorded by Dolly Parton in 1974, it was a country classic that music supervisor Maureen Crowe believed would be perfect for The Bodyguard's bittersweet farewell scene. Clive Davis, Whitney's longtime mentor and the president of Arista Records, was initially skeptical about Whitney covering a country song, but Costner was insistent. During pre-production, producer David Foster had created an arrangement that would begin with Whitney singing a cappella, completely unaccompanied, before the instrumentation gradually swelled behind her. This arrangement was revolutionary but terrifying for any vocalist. There would be no band to hide behind, no track to follow. Just Whitney's voice, raw and exposed, for the entire world to judge. The night before filming that scene, Whitney called Costner in a state of near panic. "I don't think I can do it," she told him. "What if my voice cracks? What if I can't hit the notes? Kevin, this is going to be on film forever. If I mess this up, I can never take it back." Costner drove to her hotel that night, and they sat in her suite until almost 3 in the morning, talking through her fear. "Whitney, do you remember what I told you on the first day?" he asked. "I promised I wouldn't let you fail." "I've kept that promise every single day of this production, haven't I?" Whitney nodded. "Then trust me one more time," Costner said. "Tomorrow, when you sing that song, you're not going to be performing for the cameras. You're going to be singing to me. Just me. Focus on my eyes and sing it like you're telling me goodbye. That's all you have to do. Just be real." The next day on set, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Everyone in the cast and crew knew this was going to be a historic moment. They were about to witness Whitney Houston, one of the greatest vocalists in the world, sing one of the most emotionally vulnerable songs ever written, completely a cappella, in a single take. Mick Jackson called for quiet on set. The playback of the previous scene's ending was played to give Whitney her emotional entry point. Then Jackson called action. Whitney looked directly at Kevin Costner, just as he had instructed. And she began to sing. If I should stay, I would only be in your way. Her voice, pure and powerful yet somehow fragile with emotion, filled the entire soundstage. Not a single person moved. Not a single person breathed. They were witnessing something transcendent. When Whitney reached the key change and held that impossibly high note, "And I will always love you," there were tears on the faces of hardened crew members who had worked on hundreds of films. When she finished, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the entire soundstage erupted in applause. Kevin Costner walked over to Whitney, and in front of everyone, he hugged her and whispered something in her ear that nobody else could hear. Years later, Whitney revealed what he said. "That's why I chose you. Nobody else in the world could have done what you just did. You weren't acting. You were just being the most extraordinary version of yourself." That moment, that performance, became the emotional and commercial heart of The Bodyguard. The song would go on to become the best-selling single by a female artist in music history. Spending 14 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, the soundtrack would sell over 45 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling soundtrack album of all time. Asterisk. The Bodyguard was released on November 25, 1992. Exactly 1 year after filming had begun. Despite mixed reviews from critics who called it a cheesy melodramatic potboiler, audiences loved it. The film grossed $411 million worldwide, making it the second highest grossing film of 1992, behind only Disney's Aladdin. At the premiere, Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston walked the red carpet together, smiling for cameras and fielding questions about their on-screen chemistry. Nobody asked about panic attacks or emotional breakdowns or the extraordinary measures Costner had taken to protect Whitney throughout production. To the world, it looked like everything had been effortless. But backstage at the premiere, Whitney pulled Costner aside. "I need you to know something," she said, her eyes filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You kept your promise, Kevin. You didn't let me fail." Costner's response was simple. "You never needed me to keep you from failing, Whitney. You just needed someone to remind you how extraordinary you already were." For the next 20 years, Kevin Costner never publicly discussed the full extent of what happened during The Bodyguard's production. He never talked about Whitney's panic attacks, never mentioned the scenes that had to be postponed, never revealed the hours he spent coaching her through her fear. When Whitney Houston died tragically on February 11, 2012, found submerged in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel from accidental drowning complicated by heart disease and cocaine use, Kevin Costner was devastated. He initially declined every request to speak publicly about her death. But then he received a phone call from Whitney's cousin, singer Dionne Warwick, asking him to speak at Whitney's funeral at New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey. Costner could hear exhaustion and grief in Warwick's voice, and he couldn't say no to her. On February 18, 2012, in front of Whitney's family, friends, and a television audience of millions watching the funeral broadcast live, Kevin Costner delivered a 17-minute eulogy that finally revealed the truth about their relationship and about the woman he had protected both on screen and off. Before he went to the podium, someone from the television network approached him with a request. "CNN is covering this live. Would you mind keeping your remarks short? They need to fit in commercial breaks." Costner's response was firm. "They can get over that. They can play the commercial while I'm talking. I don't care. I came a long way to talk about this little girl, and I'm going to say what I need to say." What he said in that eulogy finally pulled back the curtain on everything that had happened 20 years earlier. "Whitney, if you could hear me now, I would tell you, you weren't just good enough. You were great," Costner said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You sang the whole damn song without a band. You made the picture what it was. A lot of leading men could have played my part, but you, Whitney. I truly believe you were the only one who could have played Rachel Marin at that time." He talked about her insecurities. About how one of the most famous singers in the world struggled with self-doubt. About how she asked him constantly if she looked okay, if she was doing well enough. "I thought she was beautiful," Costner said. "I told her that she was beautiful. Whitney, if you could hear me now, I would tell you that you weren't just good enough. You were great." He ended his eulogy with words that perfectly captured what he had been to Whitney during those 4 months of filming, and throughout their friendship afterward. "So off you go. Whitney, off you go. Escorted by an army of angels to your heavenly Father. When you sing before him, don't you worry. You'll be good enough." Asterisk. Looking back now, it's clear that The Bodyguard was more than just a successful film. It was a testament to what can happen when someone in a position of power chooses to use that power to protect and lift up someone who's struggling, rather than exploit their vulnerability for personal gain. Kevin Costner had everything to lose by delaying production, by fighting for Whitney's comfort, by spending his own time and emotional energy becoming her emotional bodyguard. The film could have failed. The studio could have blamed him. His career could have taken a hit. But he kept his promise anyway. Because sometimes keeping a promise is more important than protecting yourself. Today, The Bodyguard remains a cultural touchstone, not just because of its commercial success, but because of what it represents. It showed the world that an R&B superstar could carry a major Hollywood film. It proved that interracial romance could be depicted on screen without making race the central conflict. It gave us one of the most iconic songs in music history. And behind all of that success was a quiet act of protection that nobody saw. A man who recognized that sometimes the biggest stars need the most help, and who was willing to step up and provide that help even when it cost him something. Whitney Houston went on to make 3 more films: Waiting to Exhale in 1995, The Preacher's Wife in 1996, and Sparkle, released in 2012 after her death. None achieved the cultural impact of The Bodyguard. But all of them showcased the acting ability that Kevin Costner had seen in her. From the very beginning. In every interview she gave about The Bodyguard for the rest of her life, Whitney never failed to credit Kevin Costner for her success in the role. "Kevin promised me he wouldn't let me make a fool of myself," she would say. And he kept that promise every single day. That promise, made by one artist to another, changed the trajectory of both music and film history. It gave the world a movie that has been watched and loved by hundreds of millions of people. It gave the world a song that has become the soundtrack to countless weddings, farewells, and moments of profound emotion. And most importantly, it gave Whitney Houston the confidence to step outside her comfort zone and discover a part of herself she never knew existed. This is what true protection looks like. Not bodyguards and security details, but someone who sees your fear and doesn't judge you for it. Someone who recognizes your potential even when you can't see it yourself. Someone who makes a promise and keeps it, no matter what it costs. Kevin Costner was Whitney Houston's real bodyguard, long before the cameras started rolling. And the promise he made to her in 1990 echoed through every frame of the film they made together, and through every note of the song that became her signature. Sometimes the greatest performances happen not because someone is fearless, but because someone cared enough to stand beside them while they were afraid.